Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from.
By late 2023, the independent task group monitoring the pulses noticed an entirely new development. The engine's rhythmic sequences had begun to synchronize with external magnetic fluctuations, creating brief but measurable distortions along the shoreline. Compasses didn't just drift, they snapped to impossible headings for seconds at a time before recovering. One geologist recorded a compass swing of nearly 40 degrees in under half a second, a shift that would normally require a magnetic storm. No storms were reported. At the same time, a hydroacoustic buoy anchored far outside restricted waters captured a deep, resonant tone unlike anything previously recorded. 3 ascending notes, each lasting exactly 1 point for seconds, followed by a sudden silence. The pattern repeated every 12 minutes, as if the engine were sending out an expanding signal sweep. A classified analysis leaked to civilian researchers described the tone as structured, exhibiting harmonic ratios consistent with engineered output rather than geological noise. While military vessels increased patrol density, civilian witnesses reported new visual anomalies. One boating crew described seeing a faint, dome-shaped shimmer beneath the water at dusk, glowing pale blue before fading. Another witness reported that the lake's surface seemed to breathe, rising and falling in slow pulses over an area nearly 100 meters wide. When scanned with independent sonar, that same region produced a blank return, as though the signal were being absorbed by something perfectly smooth. In December, a retired naval operator anonymously provided a set of microfilmed pages from the original Sphere project. The pages referenced an unbuilt failsafe called the overburden seal, a mechanism meant to encase the engine beneath layers of collapsing sediment if activation parameters exceeded human thresholds. The memo noted the seal was never constructed, due to cost and technical limitations. The final line read, "If activation occurs without containment, disengage all surface infrastructure and abandon the site. Do not attempt shutdown." This revelation triggered a frantic review among independent researchers, who realized the Navy's apparent neglect of the site for decades may not have been oversight. It may have been deliberate avoidance, a decision to leave the lake undisturbed rather than risk waking the system. But now the system had awakened on its own. In early January 2024, seismic sensors detected a new kind of tremor from beneath the chamber, a single, sharp spike lasting only a fraction of a second, but powerful enough to trigger alarms across 3 monitoring stations. The spike did not resemble movement or resonance. It resembled ignition. The lake went still afterward, unnaturally still, as if waiting. In early 2023, satellite gravimetric readings revealed an anomaly directly beneath the lake's central basin, a localized distortion measuring several microgoules, tiny, but far too large to be caused by sediment shifts or underwater currents. Analysts suggested the only explanation was a dense, moving mass deep within the substrate, traveling slowly along a curved trajectory that mirrored the old Sphere complex abandoned tunnel layout. This discovery reignited interest in a series of forgotten testimonies from 1962. When 2 engineers described hearing rolling pressure beneath the floors during night shifts, as though something massive were shifting inside the bedrock. At the time, their statements were dismissed as stress reactions. Now, they appeared almost prophetic. In March, the same month the mass was detected. A deepwater probe operated by a Canadian research vessel captured flickering sonar reflections from the anomaly site. The reflections formed straight-edged patterns inconsistent with natural formations, rippling like overlapping plates. Before the operators could stabilize the probe, its entire imaging system overloaded, producing a looping hiss identical to the 19R sequences recorded by hydrophonic arrays. Once the hiss ceased, the probe's internal clock was found to be off by nearly 7 minutes, as though it had experienced a temporal desync. This incident triggered renewed scrutiny of early project materials, including a rarely discussed 1957 briefing, which mentioned time domain distortions as a potential side effect of Sphere resonance tests. That briefing, long considered theoretical, now read like a warning. Meanwhile, local reports around the lake grew increasingly bizarre. Residents along the western shore described hearing short bursts of submerged thunder on otherwise clear nights. Hikers near the old access ridge claimed their GPS units froze whenever they faced the water. One man reported finding a perfect circular patch of steam rising from the lake at dawn, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. All of these events coincided, within minutes, with the predicted peaks of the pulse sequences. Government activity escalated accordingly. Unmarked barges equipped with crane rigs appeared near the restricted zone, lowering instruments that emitted brief, high-frequency pings. Military aircraft flew low over the basin at night, using spotlights to scan the water surface. A leaked communication from a contractor working with the Navy stated bluntly, "The engine is no longer dormant. Containment is no longer viable. Extraction is no longer possible." What extraction meant was unclear, but the phrasing suggested the mechanism beneath the lake had reached a stage the original architects feared. Now it was active, mobile, and accelerating towards something none of the surviving documents had ever dared to describe directly. By mid-2022, a coalition of independent hydrologists, former naval engineers, and geophysicists formed an unofficial task group to decode the anomalies' rhythmic pulses. Using long-range hydrophones placed far outside restricted waters, they triangulated the source and confirmed that the pulses were not natural reverberations, but originated from an engineered cavity with stable geometric boundaries. More disturbing was the discovery that every 19 hours, the pulse pattern shifted into what researchers called a sequence, a cluster of tight oscillations resembling encoded instructions. One analyst noted the pattern bore similarities to early machine language timing signatures, though no one could identify what kind of device might be capable of generating them from beneath a lake. Shortly after this finding circulated in private academic circles, the hydrophones began picking up a second source, a faint, counter-pulse, as if something deeper beneath the chamber was responding. Government vessels increased their patrols at night, and local residents reported hearing deep, metallic booms echoing through the shoreline before dawn. At the same time, an anonymous package was sent to a university researcher involved in the analysis. Inside were photocopies of a 1960 internal memorandum, labeled Sphera Gate Protocol, describing contingency procedures if sympathetic activation ever occurred. The memo warned that the spheres were only stabilizers, and that the true apparatus, referred to as the substrate engine, was embedded further down, beyond the constructed facility. It instructed personnel to prevent uncontrolled resonance escalation, a phrase never explained in surviving documents. The memo ended with a handwritten note, "Do not disturb the lake. The engine is older than the chamber." Days after the package arrived, the university's servers were breached, all related files wiped, and the researcher who received the documents reported being followed by unmarked vehicles. Meanwhile, fishermen around the northern coves observed strange, circular upwellings, where calm water would suddenly ripple outward as if something large had displaced the lake from below. These events coincided exactly with the 19R sequences. Seismologists who reviewed the data privately concluded that the pulses were increasing in amplitude at a predictable rate, implying the mechanism was ramping toward a threshold. Whether this threshold signaled activation, malfunction, or emergence remained unknown, but the implication was unavoidable. Whatever project Sphera uncovered or constructed in the 1950s, had begun operating again without human control, and perhaps without human permission. In late 2018, a remote-operated drone deployed by a private research group descended near the anomaly, capturing brief footage before its signal abruptly terminated. The recovered fragments showed only a few seconds of clarity, but enough to spark renewed investigation. Smooth curved panels lining the chamber, faintly luminescent seams, and a pulsing reflection that appeared to move independently of the drone's lights. Analysts determined the glow pulsed in consistent intervals, roughly 2.7 seconds apart, matching the unexplained harmonic signatures recorded in the leaked naval data from the 1990s. Shortly after the footage circulated among specialists, the research group received a cease and desist order citing national security, and within days their vessel was impounded for violations of maritime safety protocols. Members of the crew reported that unmarked helicopters hovered over them that same night, using floodlights to locate and seize additional equipment. One diver later claimed that during the confiscation he overheard a federal agent refer to the chamber as the node, a term never found in public documents, but mentioned in a declassified 1961 progress memo from the Sphere project, which described a theoretical, nodal interface required for the sphere's activation. This link suggested the complex had not only been a storage or testing site, but part of a larger system arranged beneath the lake. In early 2021, seismic monitors along the shoreline detected a series of low-frequency tremors centered precisely on the anomaly's coordinates, yet there were no geological explanations, no fault lines, no shifts in sediment, no underwater landslides. Instead, the tremors followed a rhythmic pattern, almost identical to the pulse interval seen in the drone footage. Independent physicists proposed that the chamber might not be a static structure but a mechanism, one that went dormant after the project ended and has since reactivated. A fisherman from the Green Bay coast recounted seeing a column of what he called metallic fog rising from the water on the night of the strongest tremor, dissolving into the air in seconds. Though dismissed as misidentified spray, his description matched an internal report from 1959, describing vaporized coolant escaping from a sphere during a malfunction test. Everything pointed to the same unsettling possibility. Whatever the Navy worked with under Lake Michigan did not remain inert for the last 60 years. Instead, it may have simply been waiting, continuing its cycles in secrecy beneath miles of water and sediment, while the surface world slowly forgets the existence of Project Sphera. When the complex was abandoned in early 1963, most personnel assumed the Navy would dismantle the structures, but instead the entrances were welded shut, and the access roads erased from public maps. Divers who secretly revisited the site in the 1980s described the station as eerily intact, with lights and cables still fixed in place, suggesting a hurried evacuation rather than a formal decommission. Among these divers was M. Carlisle, who later revealed that in one of the lower corridors, his team found deep circular scorch marks embedded into the metal floor, as if something intensely hot had hovered inches above the surface. The shapes matched the diameter of the spheres reported decades earlier. Around the same time, the National Oceanic Survey captured sonar scans showing large voids beneath the lake where structural reinforcements once existed, yet no collapse was recorded. It appeared as though entire sections of the complex had been removed from below without disturbing the upper layers. In 1991, a classified memo leaked from the Naval Research Laboratory referenced persistent harmonic signatures detected near the former sphere site, signatures that behaved like artificially generated pulses originating beneath the sediment. Researchers who analyzed the leaked data noted that the frequencies mirrored those previously reported by personnel during the project's final months, suggesting the phenomenon had continued long after evacuation. Local fishermen around the northern shoreline also began reporting strange occurrences: nets that tore without catching on rock, compasses that spun unpredictably, and a low, thrumming vibration through the hull when their boats drifted too close to the restricted zone. By 2005, independent sonar teams documented a new anomaly beneath the lake, a near-perfect hemispherical chamber roughly 20 meters across, far deeper than the original project footprint. Its interior reflected sonar in a way that implied smooth, manufactured surfaces rather than natural stone. The Navy denied all knowledge, issuing the same statement they had used for decades, that the 1950-1963 facility was merely an acoustic testing platform with no classified experimental activity. Yet in 2014, a FOI request accidentally released an unredacted line, referring to Object Seto, recovered 1963, implying that at least one sphere had indeed been retrieved before the vanishings. The document was swiftly retracted, but the slip confirmed long-standing suspicions. The objects were not lost, they were taken. The unanswered question, whispered among retired personnel and deep lake researchers, remains whether the new chamber detected in recent surveys represents a return, a migration, or a construction by forces still unobserved beneath Lake Michigan. Project Sphere began quietly in 1954, when the U.S. Navy announced the construction of an underwater research station beneath Lake Michigan, officially designated for acoustic studies. Internally, however, classified Navy LIM-12 documents point to a far stranger motive. According to these restricted files, the first reconnaissance divers reported discovering a set of smooth metallic spheres partially buried in the lake's sediment. The objects ranged from 30 to 80 centimeters in diameter, possessed a seamless surface without welds or markings, and were composed of an alloy that did not match any known American or foreign technology of the era. When Lieutenant W. Harrison's team attempted to hoist one of the spheres toward the surface, the support vessel's instruments were overwhelmed by electromagnetic interference. Crew members complained of intense ear pressure and a sensation that the surrounding water was faintly vibrating, as if responding to an unseen frequency. Despite these anomalies, or perhaps because of them, high-level authorization was granted to build the station directly above the discovery site rather than elsewhere. The reasoning, publicly framed as geological monitoring, was in reality an attempt to establish a controlled environment for studying the spheres in situ. Former diver J. Landry, who later spoke anonymously, claimed that the internal research modules were constructed with shockingly thick steel sections, far exceeding the pressure requirements for the lake's depth, as if they weren't worried about the water crushing in, but something inside pushing out, he said. By 1959, researchers had identified 3 additional spheres arranged in a nearly perfect triangular pattern, with spacing too precise to be natural. Experiments were performed, thermal stress tests, magnetic field exposure, high-frequency sound waves. None produced measurable results. Yet personnel increasingly reported headaches, metallic tastes, and a pulsing hum that seemed to resonate through the station's walls at irregular intervals. In late 1962, the facility began experiencing unexplained malfunctions, power drops, sensor failures, and abrupt pressure fluctuations in otherwise stable chambers. On February 6, 1963, the project ended abruptly after an entire research module was discovered flooded despite having no breach or structural damage. When evacuation was ordered and the lake surveyed again, the spheres had vanished, leaving behind only 3 perfectly smooth depressions in the sediment, as if the objects had been removed with impossible precision. 1 month later, the Navy terminated the project and sealed all remaining records.